What if your government conducted secret experiments on its own people, without consent, without limits, and without remorse? What if the aim was total control, not just over your actions, but over your thoughts, memories, identity? This is not fiction. This is MK Ultra, a covert CIA program that explored the darkest edges of science and morality. A project that was so disturbing, they tried to erase all trace of it. But some truth survived. And what we know is just the surface. The 1950s. The world is split in two. East versus West. The United States, gripped by paranoia, feared a terrifying possibility that the Soviets and Chinese had discovered a way to control minds. Reports surfaced of American POWs in Korea who returned home brainwashed, loyal to their captors, their memories altered. The CIA panicked. If mind control was real, the U.S. had to catch up or fall behind. This fear led to the birth of MK Ultra, a project launched in 1953 designed to research how the human mind could be broken, rebuilt, and ultimately controlled. At the center of MK Ultra stood one man, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. A brilliant chemist and a shadowy figure, he was called the Black Sorcerer and the Poisoner-in-Chief. Gottlieb had a singular obsession: to find a way to erase a person's mind and replace it with another. He believed that with the right drugs and psychological methods, the human will could be dissolved and rewritten. Gottlieb led dozens of sub-projects with virtually no oversight. He had full license to experiment, and he did so ruthlessly. When most people hear LSD, they think of the 1960s counterculture, of peace, love, and psychedelic visions. But long before the hippies ever tried acid, it was already being weaponized by the CIA. Sidney Gottlieb saw LSD not as a party drug, but as a potential instrument of absolute psychological control. To him, it was a key to unlocking or destroying the human mind. He imagined scenarios where LSD could be used to disorient enemy agents, force confessions, or even create assassins who didn't know they were killers. He called it mind fragmentation. And he didn't test it in theory. He tested it on people. CIA agents were secretly dosed, even at work, just to observe their behavior. One agent panicked so severely during a meeting, he ran screaming out of the building. In other experiments, prisoners, soldiers, mental patients, and even random civilians were drugged, sometimes for weeks at a time. They were monitored as they hallucinated, broke down, and sometimes lost their sense of reality entirely. But LSD was just one part of a much larger toolbox. MK Ultra explored hypnosis, hoping to implant false memories or control subjects through suggestion. They used sleep deprivation to break the will, sensory isolation to drive people into mental collapse, electroshock therapy to erase identity and turn minds into blank slates. In the darkest corners of the project, this wasn't about science anymore. It was about control, pain, power. These were not experiments to heal or understand the mind. They were attempts to dominate it. One of the most disturbing facts about MK Ultra is how many of its victims had no idea they were part of anything at all. They weren't spies or soldiers. They were ordinary people, lured in by promises of medical treatment, therapy, or even just a place to sleep. Hospitals, psychiatric clinics, universities, and even brothels were turned into testing grounds. The CIA set up fake safe houses, like the infamous Operation Midnight Climax, where men were drugged with LSD while unknowingly being observed behind one-way mirrors. The goal? To study sexual behavior under chemical influence and find ways to manipulate people when they were most vulnerable. But some of the most heartbreaking cases involved people seeking help. At McGill University in Canada, patients checked in for depression or anxiety and ended up subjected to brutal de-patterning techniques. They were put into drug-induced comas for weeks. They were electroshocked dozens of times. They heard looped recordings played for hours on end to erase and rebuild their personalities. Most left the facility unable to recognize family members, unable to speak properly, or emotionally shattered. And then there was Frank Olson, a scientist who worked with the CIA and was unknowingly dosed with LSD. After several days of psychological torment, he fell, or was pushed, from a 10th-floor hotel window in New York City. The official story was suicide. But his family later uncovered a web of lies and cover-ups. Many believe Frank had become a liability, a man who knew too much. He wasn't the only one. MK Ultra left behind a trail of broken minds, erased lives, and families that never got justice, and most of the time, they never even knew why. The evil of MK Ultra wasn't confined to shadowy underground labs or secret CIA prisons. It infiltrated the very institutions that people trusted the most: universities, hospitals, and respected medical schools. Through a complex network of front organizations, the CIA funneled money into research at places like Harvard, Yale, and Stanford. Many professors and doctors had no idea who was actually funding their work, and those who did often stayed silent in exchange for prestige, money, or power. One of the most infamous figures was Dr. Ewan Cameron, a respected psychiatrist at McGill University. Under CIA funding, he began what he called psychic driving, a process meant to erase a patient's mental structure and rebuild them from scratch. Patients were drugged with barbiturates and LSD, placed in sensory isolation chambers, and subjected to electroshock therapy at levels far beyond what was considered safe. They were forced to listen to recorded messages, things like "you are a failure" or "you are loved," played for days without interruption. These weren't hardened criminals. These were people who came in for postpartum depression, anxiety, or minor issues. Many left with destroyed cognition, permanent memory loss, or completely dependent on care for the rest of their lives. The horror wasn't just in what was done, but in how easily it was hidden behind the mask of science. No informed consent, no oversight, no apology. What many don't realize is that MK Ultra wasn't a single program. It was a network of over 150 sub-projects, each with its own code name, budget, and dark purpose. These sub-projects explored everything from truth serums to radiation exposure, from remote hypnosis to behavioral modification through torture. There were experiments involving chemical weapons, and even research into how to cause amnesia or mental illness on command. MK Ultra's reach wasn't limited to the US, it extended globally. Covert partnerships were formed with foreign intelligence agencies, especially during the Cold War. In countries like Canada, the UK, and even Germany, similar mind control experiments were conducted under CIA influence. Prisons, mental institutions, and military bases around the world became labs. People were used as test subjects, often without their knowledge or consent. It was a coordinated effort, not just to understand the mind, but to own it. Some of these sub-projects were so compartmentalized that even those working inside them had no idea what they were truly contributing to. It was a web of secrecy so deep that even Congress had trouble unraveling it years later. Few MK Ultra operations were as twisted and surreal as Operation Midnight Climax. In this sub-project, CIA agents created fake brothels in San Francisco and New York. Sex workers were hired to lure men into these safe houses, where they were secretly dosed with LSD and other substances. Then watched through two-way mirrors by CIA operatives drinking whiskey behind the glass. Why? The agency wanted to study how people behaved under the influence of drugs in intimate, vulnerable settings. They tested how easily people could be manipulated, what they would confess, and how drugs affected their trust, fear, and sexuality. It was a bizarre mix of espionage and voyeurism, part psychological experiment, part perverse fantasy of control. And these weren't enemy agents. These were random civilians, caught in a trap they never knew existed. The operation continued for over a decade, completely off the books, and when it was finally uncovered, the CIA's response wasn't remorse. It was destruction of records, denial, and more secrecy. It wasn't until the 1970s that the truth about MK Ultra began to emerge. Brave journalists, whistleblowers, and a handful of determined politicians started pulling at the threads. Among them was Senator Frank Church, who led a congressional investigation known as the Church Committee. Their findings were explosive. They revealed years of illegal experiments, conducted on U.S. and foreign citizens without consent. They exposed how the CIA had infiltrated universities, hospitals, and even the media, using front groups and hidden funding. They uncovered memos, interviews, and partial documents describing horrific acts. But not nearly everything. Why? Because in 1973, as Watergate rocked the nation, then CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all MK Ultra files. Thousands of documents were burned, shredded, or hidden, erasing the paper trail of one of the darkest chapters in U.S. history. Still, the Church Committee's final report stunned the world. It confirmed that the U.S. government had knowingly violated human rights, used torture as science, and attempted to control the minds of its own people. After the exposure came the reckoning, or at least that was the hope. Some survivors came forward, telling their stories publicly for the first time. They spoke of drugging, memory loss, hallucinations, abuse, and mental damage that never healed. A few filed lawsuits against the CIA, and in some cases won settlements, but most were met with legal barriers, bureaucracy, and a wall of secrecy. Many were told there were no records of their experiments. Others were dismissed as mentally unstable. Ironic, considering the very experiments had caused their suffering. No high-ranking CIA officials were ever charged, no major reparations were paid, and many of the doctors who participated went on to lead prestigious careers. For most victims, justice never came. And worse, some never even knew why their minds had broken. MK Ultra was officially shut down in the mid-1970s. But can a program so secretive, so deeply embedded in government power, ever really end? Many researchers, journalists, and former agents believe it never truly died. It simply changed names, funding sources, and methods. The modern tools of surveillance, neurotechnology, and AI have opened new doors to behavior tracking, emotional influence, and cognitive manipulation. Some whistleblowers claim that mind control today is more subtle, embedded in media, pharmaceuticals, and digital platforms. Instead of LSD and electroshock, now it's algorithms, targeted messaging, and dopamine hacking. MK Ultra might be over on paper, but the desire to influence, control, and reshape the human mind is very much alive. And perhaps the most chilling thought is this: the next generation of mind control might be happening right now, and we'll only know decades from now when it's already too late.